Influence Continuum. This is a podcast all about influence, not just destructive influence like the ones we see in cults, but also the ethical, healthy side of influence. Hello, I'm Dr. Stephen Hassan with another episode of the Influence Continuum, and I'm very excited, Aaron Smith-Levin, to have you. You interviewed me, and now I get to reciprocate and have you on my channel. You're a very dynamic, interesting guy. We're going to get into that. You were raised in Scientology. You were a staff member, Sea Org member, which is a billion-year commitment. We'll have you talk more about that. You had held various positions in Philadelphia, Clearwater, Los Angeles, and you left the Sea Org in 2006, officially left in 2014. But I've gotten to know you because you started the Growing Up in Scientology YouTube channel, which is very, very successful. Good for you. You're the vice president of the Aftermath Foundation, and that is connected with Leah Remini and Mike Rinder and the A&E Special and their iHeart Media radio show, etc. And you live in Clearwater, Florida, the belly of the beast, so to speak, with your wife and 3 daughters. And I'm thrilled to have you, Aaron. So welcome to the Influence Continuum.
Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here with you.
Yeah, pleasure. So I'm going to start with the basics, which is assume my listeners don't really know anything about growing up in Scientology. Give us our listeners a window into that world, please.
Well, okay, so I'll try to give that glimpse from the perspective of the child and not an adult just looking back on it, but because I think there are some, well, you could say uniquely damaging, but also uniquely empowering aspects of Scientology from the perspective of a child.
Good. I want to hear.
And that has to do with Scientology's perspective that there really are no children. There are just billion-year-old spirits in new little bodies.
Right.
And that is how L. Ron Hubbard thought about children. It's how Scientologists in general think about children. And as a child, I mean, if you were to look back on it and go, what's the worst thing about being a child? It's being treated like a child. No child loves being treated like a child. Condescended to, no rights, no freedoms, no liberties, whatever. Mm-hmm. And Scientology, my experience as a young person working for Scientology, it's interesting how much I look back on it and only remember the positives, because at that young age, being treated like an adult, given the freedoms of an adult, was quite empowering, especially contrasted to the other experience that I had as a young person in public school. I was in public school up until the 6th grade. Mm-hmm. Never had a great time of it. Always felt... I say always, you look back on these things and you paint with broad brushes. Right. I just remember feeling not listened to, not respected, not considered. And, then we joined staff at a Scientology org, and all of a sudden I'm actually getting pay. Being treated like an adult means you're given the freedoms and liberties of an adult, but also the responsibilities and burdens of an adult. And
I want to just interrupt for 1 second and say, I think if I remember correctly, your mom joined when you were 6.
I was 4 when she joined. So really some of my earliest memories are being in the Scientology org. Okay.
I just also want to comment, if you don't mind, as a mental health professional who does a lot of work with people growing up. There's a downside to being treated as an adult because you feel a pressure. You can't have fool around frivolously, and the people that I work with who were born in Jehovah's Witnesses, they would be beaten with a belt, if they were making noise in the back during the services and such. Like they weren't allowed to have fun as kids, and they had to dress
Now,
up.
is that because they're being treated as adults, or is it just against the rules to have fun?
They take their cult very seriously, because Armageddon's going to happen any moment, and little kids are shown these horrific videos of people dying everywhere who aren't part of the God's chosen organization, etc., etc. But there's a downside to rushing people through childhood, normal childhood experimentation, totally, and just fun and play and imagination. Anyway, back to your story.
Well, I think in some respects, the person going through it, and again, this is going to be different for everybody, but I think the effects, those negative effects, may not necessarily rear their heads until later in life, depending. I mean, you're in the JW, you're describing a very physically abusive situation, so that's its own thing for sure. But, as far as the developmental issues with not having the experience of having just been a child with the just that child experience, it's something I struggle with now that I have teenagers of my own. I've 3 girls, 16, 14, and 12, and in some respects, I don't know what their normal experience is supposed to be. So I sort of defer to my wife on that. Like my oldest might ask to go do this or that, and I'm like, is that normal? Is that something a high schooler would do? Because I don't think so. I need to refer to my wife, who did actually go to high school.
Yes, so that's good for your kids that they have a mom that knows more what's normal. Because honestly, when people come to me for help to recover, part of working with people born in cults is teaching them what's normal. Like what's normal developmentally is you're giving unconditional positive regard, you're sacrificing your work to take care of the child. The child always is getting a message that they're more important than other things, which in my experience with people in cults, that's the opposite. The org is always number one, and what you need to do to take care of your kid is way down the list. Sometimes they're dished off to other members to take care of. And my experience talking with some folks born in Scientology is they were labor trafficked. They were actually put to work in a way that children, it's illegal to put children to work in normal contexts in the U.S.
For sure. And it's interesting, right? Because I don't want to create the wrong impression that when I say I'm describing it from the viewpoint of the child going through it, like realize there are things that I experienced that at that age I felt were fine and okay. And only in contrast now that I have children that same age myself, do I go, would I ever in a million years let my child go through the same thing? Not in a million years. And yet there's just,
and you signed a $1 billion contract, so when you say a million, there's some nuance to that one, brother.
And so one of the reasons I'm also answering the question from sort of what were the positive aspects is way too often I see the reaction of people who watch content regarding cults like Scientology or NXIVM or anything. Way too often the response is, how could anybody X, Y, and Z? How could anybody fall for this? How could anybody believe this? And there's a part of me that goes, man, if someone watches content and that's the question they come away with, then the content did not do a good job of explaining the experience, because the truly educated position would be, oh, I see how someone could fall for that. If you think it could never happen to you, I think you're more susceptible to having it happen to you. If you understand how it works, you're more sort of cult-proofed.
I totally.
Nobody thinks they're joining a cult.
Exactly. You're echoing my melody, if you will. I'm just finishing 2 chapters for a textbook on the dark side of hypnosis, and I'm using John Atak's writing Never Trust a Hypnotist, about Hubbard's writings about hypnosis. The reason I'm mentioning it is I'm writing it with a law professor emeritus, Alan Shefflin, and he likes to talk about the myth of the unmalleable mind. Like, people are walking around thinking, never happened to me. It's those weak, stupid people from bad families, but I'm too smart. Wrong thinking. Be humble. Be human. Everybody falls for a lie. Everybody can get tricked. And if you're not sure about it, go see a magic show and get tricked time after time after time. Like, how the hell did they do that? And it's like, because we're human.
It's one of those things about blind spots is it's easy to forget that they're called blind spots because you can't see them and you don't know they're there. And it really is remarkable how many people will watch something like Scientology and go, oh, what a cult, I could never join that. And yet they are either Jehovah's Witness, or they're in deep into MLM, or they're into any other. I hesitate to name too many things for fear of insulting too many people, because nobody thinks their thing is the thing.
Right. Right. It's so true. All I can say is right now I'm not meeting anybody that doesn't know somebody who's fallen for a conspiracy theory, an alien abduction thing, an MLM, and other political conspiracy, QAnonish types of things. So it's kind of everywhere. But I just want to compliment you. You're so smart, and that I'm aware you were doing research as a Scientologist for hedge funds for how to invest. That's not a simple thing that anybody can do well, right? And I think you're still doing it. But the point is, you can be super smart and good at research, but have it in a compartment and be in a mind control cult at the same moment.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, not only do Scientologists not think Scientology is a cult, it's almost like they think they're the only ones that aren't. Like, Scientologists very much look down on other organized religions. And then ironically, Scientologists very much embrace almost any multi-level marketing gimmick that's out there. Get rich quick schemes just flourish through the Scientology population.
I'm glad to hear you say that. I'm aware of Mormons falling for them like crazy, and Jehovah's Witnesses as well. But it's this, the thing about Scientology, and I really didn't have a lot of experience with it until I got out. And when I was deprogrammed out of the Moonies in '76, one of my first friends was an ex-Scientologist who later became an attorney. So he started my education. And then I met Paulette Cooper, because we both lived in New York. And she was speaking out about Scientology, and I was speaking out about Moonies. So we had a mutual fan club. But in listening to your interview with John Atack, who's a very, very good friend of mine, God, he was harassed and just mercilessly broke up his marriage, bankrupted him. But he was he was instructing governments how to prosecute Scientology in really big legal cases. So they really had a big target on him, to the point where he stepped out of the whole thing for a long time, and then fortunately came back, but is focused more on inoculating people, like helping to teach people what to watch out for, which I do think is vitally important. But back to your story and growing up in Scientology, please.
So there was sort of a pretty strong appeal to being treated like an adult, being treated as an equal to everyone else around me. And in that environment, I did actually flourish, I mean, I was only 15 years old when I finished my entire training lineup, which began when I was 12 years old. Wow. So, I mean, I was 12 years old when I started working full-time for Scientology, full-time. I don't have any formal education beyond that point. I don't have an equivalency degree. I don't have a diploma, any of that stuff.
You could get a doctorate, buddy, in my opinion. Having gotten one recently, you have the smarts, and it's really learning the rules and the sequences. But please continue.
If it didn't take so many years, I would do it. I would make a really good lawyer.
3.5. You could do it if you could get through all of Scientology in 3 years, you could do a doctorate in 3 years. And let me tell you, people start treating you differently with a doctor in front of your name. Even though for most of my adult life, I was like, I don't need a doctorate. I know what. And anyway, it makes a difference. It's weird.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I
back
bet.
to you.
So, the growing up story, it's almost like it's just a very compressed, it's all compressed into one stage. I don't have like my adolescence and my teen years and my adult years. From the age of 13 to present, in some sense, I feel like I've been the same person. Now, whether that means I'm a really immature 42-year-old or I was a very mature 13-year-old, I'll leave it to others to to ascertain. Probably a little bit of both. But, I have been, from the age of, I say 13 because that's when I very earnestly started my training full-time. 12, I was just sort of on the on-ramp. But, I said I was 15 years old when I finished my training and started working full-time, finished my training in Clearwater, Florida, and went back to the organization I was from in Philly to work full-time, 7 days a week, 8 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock at night. And
what were you paid a week?
Oh, $50 to $100 would be a good week.
And what do you, I won't ask you what you earn now in a week, but...
Yeah, I shouldn't answer that question.
When you think back to that, isn't that kind of abusive to only pay that little?
Yeah, it was weird. It almost felt virtuous to do all that work and expect nothing in return. And again, that's actually sort of a feeling I've sort of kept with me, that it's better to do something for either nothing or a lot of money, but to do something for some, in between. There's virtue in doing something for free. There's virtue in being very well paid, but just being moderately paid. Where's the virtue in that?
That's interesting. Well, I'm going to just comment as a therapist for a minute that one of the things I help my folks with is getting out of this all or nothing thinking or black and white kind of thinking, because there is complexity. But I do, relate to what you're saying, because I charge more than most everybody else in the field of counseling cults, but I do more free work than anyone else too, because that funds me. But I can't help but come back to one of the things in the Moonies was feeling so special, like we're the chosen, we're the elite. We're the ones who know the truth with a capital T, and everyone else is walking around in slumberland and ignorant, and we're going to fix the planet. And that resonates whenever I interact with Scientologists or ex-Scientologists, this kind of elite chosenness that puts you above those wogs, those regular people. Please.
100%. And that's Scientologists have that feeling of superiority, even without any concept of a god or a supreme being or the chosen this or the chosen that. L. Ron Hubbard just created this system where you could throw all that out the window and you could still be better than everyone else. And one of the best ways to explain it is the Matrix with Neo and Morpheus and Trinity and everything. Scientologists see themselves as Neo. They see planet Earth as the Matrix. Planet Earth is a prison planet. These physical meat bodies are prisons for, Scientology's word for the spiritual being is Thetan. So Scientologists believe that as Thetans, we are trillions of years old and infinitely godlike in our potential. And through a variety of shenanigans over the trillennia, which is a word I might have made up, we have convinced ourselves that we are even capable of being trapped in bodies. And then someone sort of did a little switcheroo on us. And now, so basically we trapped ourselves and now we're stuck and we forgot that we ever trapped ourselves. And that's the matrix, right? So we're stuck in these bodies. We think we're physical bodies. We think we're living lives of free will, but we have eternal amnesia of all of our previous lives. We have none of our inherent godlike powers. And L. Ron Hubbard has convinced Scientologists that doing Scientology's Bridge to Total Freedom is the only possible way to free yourself from that trap, from that eternal prison, from that eternal amnesia. And one of the ways he's able to perpetuate this belief is because all the levels are confidential and no one's allowed to talk about what's on them.
Right.
So as a lower level,
and the galactic dictatorship on OT3. I'm just going to show quickly for the video things this model that a lot of people are outsiders, but you don't really find out the inside scoop unless you paid the money or you've jumped through the appropriate hoops.
Yeah.
But,
and here, pull up your chart. Pull up the chart
one
more time.
Oh.
Pull up the chart one more time real quick because I want to.
Okay.
This is where Scientology gets like double crazy. Is because if we were to have a conversation about what it meant to be a core devotee or a sub-leader, in Scientology, there's not even just one definition, because in Scientology, you have the most dedicated membership called the Sea Organization, and yet you can be at the highest level of the Sea Organization and be at the lowest level of the bridge and still have no idea what the secret confidential levels are all about. And so it's this weird, like double... It's like a cult within a cult. I mean, it's wild.
So I want to say for the listeners who are just like dipping their toe into Scientology as a cult, Hubbard was a science fiction writer, like first and foremost. So when you were quoting The Matrix, and by the way, there must be 20 cults, including ISIS, that use The Matrix as a device for recruiting and indoctrinating people, by the way. It's a useful paradigm. But in Scientology, it's all about money, like paying for everything. Unlike a legitimate religious group where you're supposed to, give things for free, to do charity work. Scientology does stuff for PR, but they don't really care about charity. And they're phenomenally wealthy.
Oh, they don't care about charity at all. And it's funny because as much as Scientology is about the money and has that perception, the Scientology staff don't get paid anything at all. I mean, $50 a week for the dedicated, the internal clergy, the Sea Org members. Right. $50 a week is standard Sea Org pay, and that usually gets cut. There's usually not enough money being made after management gets its cut to even pay the staff. And so as a staff member, I never felt it was about the money. And yet, organizationally speaking, it most certainly is. And one of the ways L. Ron Hubbard explains that is he goes, if you gave it away for free, people wouldn't value it. People only value it if you pay for it, and therefore the more you charge, the more they'll value it. Now, even as I say that out loud, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
It's social psychology, though, because if you understand cognitive dissonance theory, if you do an extreme behavior like pony up a lot of money, you rationalize to feel good about having ponied up a lot of money.
That's true. And you look at how hard Scientology staff around the world are working to get new people into Scientology and get them up Scientology's Bridge to Total Freedom. The number one barrier to being able to accomplish that at a greater scale is the incredibly high cost of Scientology. So you have this incredible contradiction. Like, Scientologists would object to the characterization that Scientology is secretive and insular. Scientologists would go, we want everybody to become Scientologists. We would like you all to walk in the front doors tomorrow and know everything that we know. Scientologists don't see it as secretive. And the biggest barrier to accomplishing that is the cost. And this is this massive dissonance that occurs internally, that exists internal in the organization, this push and the pull of wanting to bring in new members, but nobody can afford it.
Right. So people don't understand how small the core membership is of Scientology? When I talked with Mike Rinder, and I want to plug his new book, Billion Years, he said that it's 25,000 at most in the world. Is that your sense as well?
Yeah, I have a breakdown that I do like by continent and by organization and by echelon of organization that comes to an extremely charitable, generous estimate of 30,000 members. So when you start with such low numbers, it's hard to really get a sense of how fast they're declining. Could it be 25? Could it be 20? I'm going to do a new video on this soon. I find it hard to imagine it being less than 20 the way I calculate the numbers. Okay. But it's somewhere between 20 and 30.
It's not 8 million as they say in their PR.
No, exactly. I mean, they will say there's 8 million Scientologists. Right. I mean, that's like almost as many like Jewish people as there are or something, you know? I mean, it's insane. And, you know, half the states in the United States don't even have a single Scientology organization. A state of Pennsylvania, as big as it is, has one. The state of New Jersey, 0. I mean, New York, the entire state of New York, maybe 3. Mm-hmm. Like, there's more Starbucks within 1 mile of my house than there are Scientology organizations in like New Jersey, New York, Pennsylvania, and Delaware.
Yeah, I actually did a formula like that about the Moonies, trying to take their number of 3 million and go, how many are in New York? How many are? And it was like 2,000,
that's right.
5,000. You know, it's just like ridiculously small numbers. But wealthy, powerful, big law firms, big PR firms, for sure.
And so that's one of the things you mentioned, how small Scientology is, and also this sort of relates to what you mentioned before. Like, it's not idiots that are joining Scientology. It's not idiots that join cults. I mean, could they? Sure. Is that the equation? No, it's not. And Scientology is one of the biggest beneficiaries of that. Is they have such a small membership, but the members tend to be affluent business owners, a lot of professionals, dentists, chiropractors, physical therapists,
deliberately doing marketing, consulting, etc. They
have these, They have a whole network of business consulting firms that have repackaged Scientology materials into course packs that can be sold to non-Scientologists. And people unsuspectingly sign up for business consulting from organizations that have the true ulterior motive of funneling this person into Scientology. Even one of my own family members who knows all about Scientology just accidentally, without knowing what they were signing up for, signed up for a business consultant to help their dental practice. And I got an email from my dad like the next day, like, I just found out about this. They're obviously Scientologists. What, you know, can you confirm for me? Are these guys Scientologists? I'm like, oh yeah, 100%. I'll do anything I can to help them get their money back.
Good.
But these are smart people, and they already know about Scientology, and they still got suckered into the funnel.
Well, that brings up a really important point, which is in the world of cult education, it doesn't help to just give a name, because these groups have so many front groups, or they change the name as soon as they get a big media exposure in a negative way. So it's better to like do the skeletal formula. And for me, I like to explain the deceptive recruitment as a big red flag, or the don't talk to ex-members or critics ever. Like if anyone ever says to you, don't ever talk to an ex-member or critic, run and find the smartest ex-member and critic and go, tell me what's going on and why they don't want me to speak with you. And then you get what's really happening.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, it seems to me that if you sign up for anything and one of the first things they tell you is that there's a certain type of person that you need to cut out of your life, that's probably a huge red flag. Like, sure, are there negative influences in your life? Yeah, sure. Everyone, everywhere, at all times is going to have something in their life that's affecting them negatively. But if you sign up for some course or some program or some retreat, and the first thing they're telling you is, here's the bad people that you should separate from, it seems to me that's like red flag number one.
Yep, for sure. Or you'll find out when you're ready. You need to go through the courses, and then we'll tell you what the beliefs are. What?
Yeah.
You want me to pay money and make a commitment of time and energy, but you won't tell me what is up there? And what's up there is Hubbard was source with a capital S, supposedly, and that he was in the OTO and all kinds of other things that are in John's book, Let's Sell Him a Piece of Blue Sky, that the public doesn't know about.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it kind of goes without saying, this to me is the essence of a cult is if you've got one dude, just one dude who for some reason is supposed to be the source of all correct knowledge about anything. I mean, again, it seems a little too on the nose, right? Like, obviously, you're talking about a cult, and yet Scientologists don't see it that way. Members of Nexium don't see it that way. Like, this is where you get someone going, "How could anybody fall for this?" And you go, "Well, they do."
Right. Well, Keith Raniere, who's in jail for 120 years for trafficking, claimed to be the smartest man on earth. But did anyone test that? Or he claimed to be a martial artist. Did anyone test that? Like, I would bring a black belt in and he'd get his ass kicked real fast. And that would be, but this brings up a bigger point in the world that we live in, Aaron, which is check out the source of information. Like, what are their credentials? Hubbard, science fiction writer. He claimed to have a PhD in nuclear physics. Where's the diploma? He claimed to be a great naval war hero. Where's the evidence of that? And you find out it's all a lot of lies.
Yeah. So much of Hubbard's life, I mean, he does strike me as a personality type who couldn't tell you a true story about something that really happened without just making it sound more incredible. Like, doesn't it seem like that was just kind of how he was? He would alter everything. Even if the story was already incredible, he'd be like, it's not incredible enough, Like Dianetics. On some level, I believe that Hubbard thought he had come up with something that was going to work and make him famous. And yet if we start with that assumption, right, that he believed Dianetics was a workable mental therapy, you read Dianetics and it's just littered with pure, unadulterated nonsense. Stuff he was just inventing from whole cloth.
We weren't
Cures
evolved
cancer.
from clams, you mean? What do you mean?
No, that wasn't Dianetics.
Oh,
that
sorry.
wasn't Dianetics.
But that was something he said, right?
That was, I think, History of Man. Yeah, that was later on. That was later.
Okay,
but like,
sorry.
honestly, like there's, even from just a pure scientific perspective, he could not write Dianetics and be honest about it. Well, he couldn't because there was no science behind it. It was just, stuff he came up with. But like, meaning he was making just fantastic claims that he couldn't have possibly believed in order to sell something that he probably believed was helpful. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I don't know if he believed that it was helpful because he ripped most of his stuff off from psychiatrists and other people he made into devils, actually.
But don't you think he thought he'd improved on it? Like he stole from others and thought he put his own flourish on it or something?
So in my research, malignant narcissists are the stereotypical profile of cult leaders. So that's the narcissism, the grandiosity, the entitlement, the lack of empathy, and those things. But then the malignancy comes in with the thinking they're above the law, pathological lying, sadistic, paranoid, inability to trust. So when you look at Hubbard or Moon or Jim Jones or David Koresh, yada, 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 they all are fanciful and blow things up because they feel so insecure inside. Basically, they really didn't get love when they were young, and they're so insecure that they make up for it by vampiring off of people's affection and attention and projections on them that say, you're smart, you're great, you're wonderful. And there's a loop that happens when you're in a closed system where you need more and more and more of it. And the minute anyone challenges you, you lied or you changed this, you're out.
Wow, that describes Hubbard to a T, doesn't it? I mean, even back in the early days of the early Dianetics foundations, anytime anyone, not even challenged him, but even so much as tried to contribute in a way that he thought was above their pay grade, it was just instant attacks. And yeah, I mean, you just described L. Ron Hubbard.
Yeah, and I want to plug, forgive me, I've brought up John a couple of times, but he's written a really important book called Opening Minds that kind of focuses on this malignant narcissism piece that I think is so important. But I want to come back to trafficking and growing up in Scientology, because I'm aware there's a lawsuit right now about labor trafficking, and I believe I saw Mike Rinder opining about David Miscavige, the now head of Scientology, being served. Can you give us the latest about that case and what it's about?
Sure. Yeah, so there's a case. It's Baxter and Paris versus David Miscavige et al. So Gawain Baxter, Laura Baxter, and Valeska Paris are three former Sea Org members who worked on the Scientology ship the Freewinds.
Okay.
And they're suing David Miscavige and 4 or 5 different Scientology entities. And it's essentially a labor trafficking lawsuit, is my understanding. Mm-hmm. Now, right now, the entire suit is wrapped up in the arbitration agreements that Scientologists signed, promising to never sue Scientology for any reason forever. So this is the first major hurdle that this lawsuit has to get past, is Scientology is saying, no matter what's happened here, what may or may not have happened, these people have promised to go to internal arbitration. The plaintiffs are saying those agreements are signed under duress. We want to move forward with a lawsuit. So on the one hand, the suit is currently at that level. A judge is going to rule on the enforceability of the arbitration agreements. At the same time, all of the entities in this case have accepted service and are actively cooperating with the suit, except David Miscavige. Right. He has been in hiding for close to 3 years now, avoiding process servers. Right. He does pop up here and there at Scientology events. He's scheduling meetings with Clearwater City officials to work on property swaps and stuff like that. But at like 11 different addresses where he is known to live or work, everyone's like, David Miscavige, never heard of him. Right.
So go ahead, please finish up.
Well, the plaintiff's attorneys have had to really jump through hoops to prove to the court that he's just intentionally evading service, and Florida law doesn't really allow for someone to just play games like that. So they have been diligently following a somewhat convoluted process that they have to follow to prove to the court. They really have done everything that they can in order to serve Miscavige, and they're asking the court to not only rule that he has been served, but that he is in a default. Is default the wrong word? I don't know. He has been served, and he is in violation of the service.
He's in default.
Default, yeah. And so that's where it stands right now. It does look like the plaintiff's attorneys have dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's and have all their paperwork in order, and just 2 days ago filed their final motion with the court, the federal court in Tampa, to consider Miscavige served. Here's why this is a big deal. If Miscavige is served, discovery moves forward and he will be deposed. And that is worst case scenario.
No cult leader wants to have to answer, honestly, in a court of law. But I want to come back for 1 minute, because this is a problem on many, many destructive cults where they've given these legalese documents to people who've been, in my opinion, unduly influenced, not given informed consent, and sign here if you want to do the next level, or sign here in order to progress. And you need capacity and you need information to make an informed choice. And I'm aware of one cult, a Korean cult called the World Mission Society Church of God, where one of their leaders was told, make an NDA, make everybody sign it. So he formulated it, signed it, and then he was sued after he left to speak out. And it went through the judge, and the judge said he wasn't of sound mind when he signed it. So I think this is such an injustice for any group.
It
to
is.
Say,
it's incredible. It's incredible.
You signed your life away. You've signed a slavery forever document.
And, not being a legal expert or scholar, it's not clear to me at this point whether we need different laws or whether we just need different interpretation or implementation of the laws. Up until now, the precedent has been in favor of Scientology on this.
Yep. And
the fact that the courts have upheld these agreements in other cases just shows such an incredible lack of understanding of how the cults work. The cults, Scientology is aware that some of these agreements signed by minors are not legally enforceable. And so they change their procedures so that, like, literally every time you do a new major service, you sign the form again. And yet at every step of and so someone who originally signed the forms as a child might have signed the forms again many times as an adult. Right. And to the court, a court goes, well, how can you say you signed it under duress when you signed it 5 times? And you go, well, you have to be able to understand that. You have to be able to understand how that happens, and that every single time they're signing this form, it's just sign the form. It doesn't matter, because what's the alternative? Losing all of your friends in your family and everyone you've ever known? Like, is that really?
And the bridge to total freedom, giving that up.
Yeah.
But I want to just add, why did Steve Hassan in his 60s do a doctorate? Well, it's because I realized the law is about 100 years out of date. We are not adults at 18. Now we know you need to be 25 to 26 to have your executive functioning fully operational. And so I got involved with a forensic think tank at Harvard Medical School, and I said, well, Robert Lifton has a model for brainwashing, and Margaret Singer and Edgar Schein. And they're like, yeah, but those are qualitative studies. They're interviews. That's not hard science. You should do a hard science on your bite model of authoritarian control and show whether or not it holds validity. Because I really feel like we need to update the law, not just for minors and elderly people with dementia, but to help explain to everyone, here are the characteristics, here's the formula. I use Alan Shefflin. I'm going to quote him again. He has a social influence model, Aaron. The influencee and their unique vulnerabilities, the influencer or the predator or the predatory organization, and how they deceive, isolate, make dependent, install phobias, all the things from my bite model. And this is a way for experts to explain to judges and juries what undue influence is. And the minute, because undue influence is a 300-year-old legal concept, it's not new. Can't use brainwashing, that's too mushy a construct. But undue influence, lawyers understand, so that's where I think the future is going to be in terms of winning.
How do you do a quantitative study on that?
So I took my every attribute of behavior control, information control, thought, and emotional control, and I did what's called the Likert scale of never to always. And I administered the test to over 1,000 people. A whole bunch of them are former members, but not only. And we came up with a statistically very high, what's called factor analysis of control. And so that's only the beginning. I mean, more people. I have a BU professor working on what's called content validity. Because in science, someone does a study, it's got to be challenged. Can we replicate it? Is there a better model? Because I'm happy to give up my model if there's a better descriptive model that judges and juries can use for undue influence. But so far, I wrote about BITE in 1988, and people have been reading about it and leaving cults ever since. So I think I've got some of the core essences that need to be conveyed.
Was this study what you did for your PhD thesis?
Yeah, exactly. My dissertation is on my website. It's also published in the academic ProQuest for everyone to read. And I'm really encouraging more people, because one really exciting thing for me is more people are coming out of Scientology and other cults and becoming mental health professionals or becoming scientific researchers because they care about this subject. They care about their family and friends left behind. And this is what's going to help free the largest number of people everywhere, is to clarify, what's a healthy group? Informed consent. What's an authoritarian group? Deception, withholding vital information, outright lies, or distorting information. Encouraging people to use their conscience, telling people to follow the dogma. So you have the poles on the influence continuum, which is why I call this podcast The Influence Continuum, because I don't want to just talk about the negative side, but I want to talk about ethical things. Like I'm doing an interview with a psychiatrist on spontaneous remission of terminal diseases. He did a study over 12 years, and he came up with what are the factors that have helped these people who got rid of tumors they should never have been able to get rid of. And it's not just, believing it, because I know in Scientology people are told, you don't need medicine. It's all psychosomatic. Am I speaking correctly? And so people
they think pretty much everything pretty much is psychosomatic.
Yep.
And yet it's weird though, because that's true. And yet seeing a doctor is not prohibited. It's not like Christian Science or something.
Right.
But it certainly does create a reluctance and a hesitancy to see a medical professional, because, L. Ron Hubbard said almost everything's psychosomatic, so why wouldn't you just fix it with Scientology?
Well, and I remember being on a Sally Jesse Raphael show right after the 1991 Time magazine cover story on the cult of Scientology, and there was a woman with a brain tumor from Scientology who had pain, and they kept giving her auditing. So she didn't get diagnosed and treated, and she died. And she was a beautiful, intelligent young woman. And Kirstie Alley passed away of colon cancer. I don't know what the backstory is for her, but I've really heard about a lot of people dying from things that could have been treated if they had caught it earlier.
Absolutely. And yet it really is that hesitancy and that reluctance, because science, it's almost, it is a crime in Scientology to say that Scientology doesn't work or didn't work or hasn't worked or won't work. So whereas if an individual Scientologist simply said, hey, I'm going to go to the doctor, whereas they would not get in trouble for that, no one at the org, none of the auditors, case supervisors, none of the people who are responsible for delivering Scientology are allowed to say Scientology's not working. They need to go to a doctor. So the onus on it is like completely on the individual themselves. And there's this cultural reluctance to do it.
Reluctance.
There you go. Is that the derivation of the word?
Yeah, absolutely. Huh. Absolutely. But now I want you to talk about Lisa McPherson. Because Lisa was held against her will. She was following Hubbard's prescription, and she died.
I don't know that it was against her will. She was certainly being held by unqualified people.
I want to get out. There were notes, my recollection.
Oh, I mean, if that's the case. I mean, I've read a lot about it. I don't know that I've read everything about it. But okay, so Lisa, there's two things here. One of the agreements that Scientologists sign, there's like 4 different enrollment agreements that they sign. Every Scientologist signs when they do major courses, major services. It gives the Scientology, any Scientologist, Scientology official, the authority to check someone out of a mental hospital. So like if a Scientologist is committed for any reason, they have documentation on file at their local Scientology org that permits someone from Scientology to go and check them out on religious grounds that this person, right? So originally what Scientology did was they checked Lisa McPherson out of the mental facility in Morton Plant Hospital that she had been admitted to, because she had lost her mind. She was in some minor car accident. She got out of the car. She completely undressed and was walking up and down the street nude. Right. And so she was committed. And so Scientology took her out of the hospital. So this is what I'm saying. I'm not sure at what point it went from, it was against, I just don't know at what point it was against her will.
Well,
right?
I'm gonna state categorically that when you use the term agreement, they sign an agreement. You need to have full competency and capacity and information to agree to something. If you're in a mind control cult, and this is what I did in these chapters on the dark side of hypnosis, I talk about the TRs, the training routines, being hypnotic indoctrination to obedience in Scientology. And I've demoed the TRs for experts in hypnosis, and they all said, oh, that's hypnosis. But Scientologists are told they are dehypnotizing people. Everyone else in the world is hypnotized except them. Except
that's true.
Hubbard was a hypnotist. He really was.
That's true. So with Lisa McPherson, Scientology has the way they handle it. It's funny because Scientology is so vehemently against any forms of mental therapy, and yet they themselves have absolutely no tools and no ability to handle mental breaks. Right. The only thing L. Ron Hubbard prescribed for someone having a mental break is what they call a type 3 watch, the introspection rundown. Type 3 is a term in Scientology where someone's gone crazy. They've lost their mind. Mm-hmm. And it's literally putting them in a concealed room, no communication with anybody. Anyone who interacts with them is not allowed to speak with them. It's essentially confinement until they chill out. Well, with no professional supervision of it's essentially solitary confinement, and with a crazy person, like you think of solitary, you think of a prisoner has hurt someone, they're in solitary. You're protecting the general population from that person. This is a case where a person has just sort of lost their mind. They might even be a threat to themselves.
Or maybe they just wanted to leave, and by definition, the cult said they were crazy.
Well, wanting to leave won't get you put on a type 3 watch. You do have to be like having some sort of a mental breakdown. But I mean, wanting to blow is you can be put under watch, and that's not the same thing as being put on a type 3 watch.
No, I agree. No, I get it.
Okay. And so with Lisa, what makes what happened with Lisa different than any other person on a type 3 watch in Scientology is her physical condition deteriorated so rapidly, and there's absolutely no qualified medical supervision of any kind whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And there was no one there capable of actually understanding what was truly happening with Lisa, to the point where it didn't really truly occur to them that she needed to be hospitalized until she was hours away from death. Yep. And the only reason you don't see more people dying under a type 3 watch is it just purely has to do with their physical condition. Like, it's just, I guess, usually when people are on a type 3 watch, they eventually snap out of it. Yeah. And in Lisa's case, that didn't happen, and she was physically deteriorating rapidly. And so when I said it wasn't against her will, all I'm saying is I don't know at which point it would have become against her will. But, because she was a true believing Scientologist, that's kind of what I mean when I say that.
I could be wrong, and we can move on because there's so many other points we can make. But my recollection was she had the minor car accident, took off her clothes. They said, "Why are you doing that? Because I want you to think I'm crazy," was what they said. She said.
Oh,
and I've worked with people who are in cults who literally try to exorcise the demon from their own son because he wanted to leave the cult, and he killed his son, and he's in jail.
Oh, so let me ask you this. Do you have the idea that what she was doing, what led to her hospitalization, that was her attempt to get away from Scientology?
That was my understanding. And
I mean, if that's the case, I've never understood that. I mean,
that was my
intellectually speaking, the
understanding.
reason I would lean away from that is because she was just a public Scientologist.
Yeah,
You can
but
just
she
leave
was on the
Scientology.
free winds. Anyway, she worked for Scientology.
No, but I
Anyway.
mean, if you want to leave, you can leave. You don't have to be hospitalized to leave.
Oh, absolutely. No,
Yeah.
I saw pictures of the autopsy and the bed bugs, and she lost 40 pounds, and she was not a heavy woman. She was a very attractive,
Yeah.
properly proportioned woman. But
Yeah.
being in Scientology, if I can be honest, it's crazy making. You can't really have all your own critical thinking operational and be in a Scientology cult, because
Yeah.
you're, like you were saying at the beginning, you think you're an alien that's millions of years old, and you're in this flesh meat suit, and Xenu, if you did OT3, Xenu, the galactic dictator, flew you to the planet Tigiak and put you in volcanoes and detonated a hydrogen bomb, which is what the bombs were in the 50s, not now.
Well, Steve, when you say it like that, it sounds crazy.
Yeah.
But you know, Lisa never got up to the OT levels. She never even learned about all that stuff.
No,
and
I
it's
know.
amazing. It's always been amazing to me that more people don't go absolutely crazy on the OT levels, considering the implication of what's on them. What's on them is it's like the ultimate in multiple personality disorder.
Correct.
That these thousands of these spirits are infesting, attached to your body, attached to you as a being. They're controlling your thoughts, your emotions, your feelings, your pains, your illnesses. I go, that seems designed to drive people insane. And I've always been amazed that more people don't go insane on the OT levels.
Yeah, and people are told that they can recover their powers to move objects with their mind and control the weather, to which I've always said to high OTs, I'm a critic of Scientology, but I'll join right now. Levitate that ashtray over there, only with your powers. Don't touch it. And I'll join. And they're like, I don't want to reduce this to a parlor trick, or you wouldn't believe it if you saw it. To which I say, yes, I'd believe it. You do it 3 times with 3 different objects, with no magnets, no holograms, etc. I'll be a big advocate for Scientology, right? But it really is a dissociative disorder. From my mental health training, you're split from your authentic self and your good Scientology self, and people like yourself, in my experience, and it was similar to a woman I just interviewed, Yasmin Mohammed, who was raised in an Islamic fundamentalist household, who wasn't raised that way for the first few years, and then her mother converted, and she always rebelled. It was like, this, I don't want to be this way, but finally she broke free. But what a horrible set of experiences she was put through.
Wow. Hey, I have a line of questioning I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
Because going back to what you said about wanting to do this study, because you said the laws in the books about coercive control are like 300 years old or whatever, right?
Undue influence is the term. British
undue
common
influence.
law. Undue influence.
So to what degree do you think, because Mike Rinder has stated that one of the problems that exists here in the United States, judicially speaking, is that the religious right they very much would not want to establish any legal precedent by going against, say, Scientology.
1000%.
That would possibly open their organizations up to examination that they would not welcome. Is that a big problem?
Absolutely. So I'm going to go back in time to 1976, when I first was deprogrammed from the Moonies. I had a near-fatal van crash, which is how my family found me. and I had cast on my leg and both legs, and I was walking around in crutches. So when I was lured to my sister's house, they just took my crutches away, and I couldn't run away or fight. And it was my father's tear that convinced me to throw my family a bone and prove I wasn't in a cult and I wasn't brainwashed, right? But back then, when I first got out, when people wanted to rescue a loved one from the Moonies, they would go to court and get what's called an ex parte conservatorship, which means the person you're going to the judge isn't present in court. They're the adult child in the Moonies. And the argument that we did before the judge was, Your Honor, we believe our adult son was a victim of artful and designing people. We would like custody for 1 week to expose him to former members, to teach him about brainwashing in China. Please grant us this legal conservatorship. And they were granting them. And I did a bunch of deprogrammings where it was totally legal, and they almost always worked. But the cults freaked out because they realized, oh my goodness, this is working and people are leaving. So they went to all the other major religious groups and said, these evil people are kidnapping adults and forcing them to renege on their religious commitments. And if you don't back us up, you're next. And they did that routine. And I truly believe that any legitimate religious group that is honest, transparent, doesn't lie to people to recruit them in, allows people conscience, people can leave without threats or harassment, they're not going to be intimidated by any laws about undue influence. It's only the extremists that are doing these types of extracting large sums of money out of people who can't afford it, etc.
So what happened? Did those ex parte conservatorships stop getting approved?
Exactly.
Really?
Yeah. And
so judges that were approving them were now disapproving them, or it's never the same judge, or what?
No, there was the cults, the Moonies, and they were all working together against the common enemy, the deprogrammers and the cult awareness people. And so they literally went to Jewish agencies and Christian organizations, and they gave that whole lobbying spiel that if the next, if you don't back us up, you're next. So people are going to go after the Catholic Church next if you don't back us up. And so there was this huge religious right lobby. And that's part of the problem, because a lot of these groups are very wealthy, and they cultivate Supreme Court judges, and they cultivate, other politicians. So it's really, we really need to get back to separation of what's called separation of church and state, which includes mosques and temples and atheists too, just a separation of this. But right now, it seems like we're going in the wrong direction in the United States.
So I have said on my channel a few times, based on the comments that Mike Rinder's made on the subject, that, it is the Christian right, that the evangelical right, that ends up carrying Scientology's water for them, whether they know it or not. And the viewers on my channel who are Christian don't really understand what I'm talking about. And I didn't even know what you just said. Like, what you just said is a perfect example of how it is the Christian right that really does hold an enormous amount of power in this country is the one that ends up running air cover for Scientology. And I feel like if they truly understood what we were talking about, with these cults and whatnot, they're not doing themselves any favor, these Christian groups, these Christian activist groups or Christian rights groups, by allowing Scientology to hide behind their shield. They're not doing themselves any favors.
Except
they would have more credibility. Go ahead.
I'm going to challenge you on that, because in my research, for example, the 40, 50 million people who think that Trump actually won the 2020 election, even though all of Trump's people said no, they're in what's called New Apostolic Reformation megachurches or smaller churches. And what those are mind control cults by my evaluation. They have a person who says, I'm an apostle or I'm a prophet. I can talk directly to God and get revelations. I can speak in tongues and cast out demons and do faith healings. And they operate behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control to make spiritual warriors to
Would someone like a Joel
America.
Osteen? Would someone like mega church like like, are we talking about just mega churches, or are we talking about people who can consider themselves prophets?
We're talking about people who claim to be part of the New Apostolic Reformation. There's actually a website where it's like a union of these. And this is a new version of Christianity. People who actually know the New Testament, know the teachings of Jesus, go, this is not it. They're not about power and money and politics. It's about being a good person to the least in the kingdom and refuting.
I hadn't heard that phrase before. The New
Apostolic Reformation.
Apostolic Reformation.
Come to my website, Freedom of Mind, put in New Apostolic Reformation. I have a former pastor of one of these groups who's now a Bible scholar. I interview him twice. And a fellow who wrote a book on this organization. This is 650 million people worldwide, Aaron. This is not a small group. And they think they're going to take on, defeat Islam and Judaism, and they're going to have a Christian world, they think. That's their
So these Christian rights groups or multi-faith religious freedom groups, I don't know the best way to describe them. You're telling it is the work of these groups.
Christian rights. I'm talking. I'm more.
No. Different train of thought. Different train of thought. It is these groups that got our judiciary to stop approving these ex parte conservatorships. Like, to me, that is remarkable. I've not heard about that. Is there documentation about this?
I'm sure there is, because I lived it. I mean, I literally was talking to people, only even the Moonies, when I was doing forcible deprogramming, but they were legal for the most part. And we literally would have a sheriff knock on the Moonie door, ask to see the person, and escort them out for a week with us. And unlike the brainwashing manual that it turned out the OSA did, saying, beat up the people and rape the women, their faux deprogramming manual. But no family who cares about their loved one in the Moon cult would allow anyone to harm their loved one. I mean, be real. They would not.
Yeah. David Miscavige, in his famous interview with Ted Koppel back in 1992, I
remember that live.
There's some part of that interview where, they show some interviews with some former Scientologists, and then Miscavige says something that, there's one guy who's organized all this people. Maybe at that time the Cult Awareness Network still existed or whatever. And Miscavige accuses someone live on national television of conspiring to kidnap people. And it did occur to me, I bet he's talking about deprogramming.
Yeah, so Ted Patrick was the fellow who created the term deprogramming, and the disinformation, and I credit or discredit Scientology for this propaganda, made the Cult Awareness Network, which was a constellation state by state of ex-members and parents, made it into a deprogramming organization that would kidnap and beat and torture and rape people to get them out of their religious groups. And that's just not true. There were a few people who were deprogrammed by Ted Patrick who worked for him, who did forcible stuff. But they got arrested and they retired because they were going to spend the rest of their life in jail. I myself, once they stopped giving the conservatorships, I only did voluntary things because I don't.
Yeah, because I was going to say,
I just. I mean,
having grown up in having grown up in Scientology, deprogramming is a dirty word.
In the Moonies, it was a dirty word. I was petrified that Satan. I was shown the Exorcist movie, Aaron. You were mentioning The Matrix. When the Exorcist came out in '74, Moon sent the whole New York membership to watch it, brought us up to Tarrytown, and he gave a speech how God made the This is a movie that's a prophecy of what will happen if you leave the Unification Church.
Which message in the movie? Like what? You're going to
You will be possessed a la demons if you leave the Moonies. We believe that.
Wow.
That was what I call phobia indoctrination. I'm Jewish. I don't believe in Satan or evil spirits possessing me. That was a new idea. Watching that movie and then hearing the Messiah, the greatest man in human history, say God made that movie, and this is what will happen if you leave. At that point, I stopped allowing any critical thoughts whatsoever. I was petrified.
Well, it's funny. I sort of scoff and laugh at the idea of being possessed by demons, but you go, but that's exactly what Scientology believes.
Body thetans.
The demons are just body thetans.
Right.
I mean...
No, it's pretty trippy. It really helped me, though, get out of the Mooney mindset by talking to ex-Scientologists and ex-Children of God and ex-Krishna. I never knew they existed. They try to recruit me, but I never understood the mindset or what was the actual parallels with it. But since it was really Jonestown that was like a huge wake-up call, because when I watched the bodies face down on the jungle floor in November of '78, my first thought was, oh my God, I could have done that. If I was ordered to drink cyanide-laced Flavorade, I would have done it.
Yeah. Yeah. People ask me if I think there's any possibility that Scientology, at the highest levels of management could go that way. And the first response is, no, of course not. But I could think of scenarios where it would. They would be extreme scenarios, but it was extreme in the case of the People's Temple. Yeah. Scientologists believe that L. Ron Hubbard causatively dropped his body so that he could pursue his upper level research into upper OT levels. And, all you would have to do is convince Scientologists that L. Ron Hubbard has now gotten Target 2. L. Ron Hubbard, when he died, Scientologists believe he went off to Target 2 to start Scientology on another planet. That Target 2 is well in hand, and the suppressive forces have, looks like they're going to win here on Earth. And so he needs everyone to drop their body and go join him on Target 2.
You got it.
It's just as simple as that. Now, Do I think that's going to happen? No, I don't. But if David Miscavige convinced Scientologists of that, a certain percentage of them would do as he wished.
And if people listen to people like yourself, Mike Rinder, Leah Remini, and others, John Atack, I've heard story after story that the average person would go, why would anyone believe that or do that? The story of somebody who had to push a pencil down the hallway with their nose? Like, really? Like, how is that spiritual? Like, how is that in any shape, way, or form a human rights organization?
Yeah.
So
Wild
we're gonna
stuff.
Wrap up. This has been so interesting. I'm going to give you the last words, and I hope we can talk further.
Oh yeah, we can chat anytime. Last words, I would just encourage people to check out the Aftermath Foundation website. We help people who are escaping.
Just give us a few words about.
So the Aftermath Foundation is a nonprofit that we created to help people who are escaping from Scientology. escaping from the Sea organization, in many cases, restarting their lives completely from scratch, losing everything and everyone they've ever known. It's called the Aftermath Foundation, named after the Aftermath television show. Right. Leah Remini is not on the board, but she is a big supporter of the foundation. And it's just been phenomenally successful. We've been able to help people escape from Scientology from all echelons and all regions. And it's just been wildly successful. So,
and former members really appreciate a helping hand to exit, and they're incredibly hardworking and loyal. You know, so if anyone wants to do a similar nonprofit to help people get out of other groups, I totally think it's a wonderful thing. And I thank you for all your tireless work, because I think you're doing a real contribution by having your channel on YouTube.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
Great. Thanks again, Aaron. Take care.